Hello everybody, this is Danny from Deep South Homestead on Porch Time today. Today is the wonderful day that the Lord has made. It is a day that I can rejoice in. I want to start out by saying that. And good morning to each and every one of you. I trust that you all had a good night's rest and that you've had a wonderful day so far. Guys, today I want to talk about a subject, and if the wind's blowing, hey, it's really nice out here. I mean, it's a little bit cooler, the wind's blowing, it's really nice. And I do want to start off by saying thank you for all those who lifted me up in your prayers while I was at the hospital the other day. Had a brief spell with my heart, a little uncomfortable. We figured it might be something we needed to check out. We did, and it seems like everything was okay. So we're gonna go with that for right now. But I want to talk about a subject. To some people, it's a little bit touchy, and other people, it's not so touchy. Never was an issue for me in my life, but I want to talk about living on less so that you might have more. Now, I know that may sound a little unusual, but the bottom line is this. At some point in your life, if you live on less, at some point in your life, you can live on more. And it's all about discipline. Now, many of y'all have heard me tell you the story about my own personal life, because that's the only thing I can talk about is my life. I can't relate to anyone else's life because I haven't lived their life. I've only lived my life. You've heard me talk about how that for 7 years I worked very long, hard hours, almost 7 days a week, and how I dumped my money into my place here, and I lived on very little. I didn't go out to eat. You heard me say I didn't go to movies. I didn't rent movies. I didn't have cable. I mean, there's lots of things. I didn't travel. I didn't do anything for 7 years. I just stayed home, and I lived on virtually nothing. I lived on less, so that at the end, like now, I can live on more. And lots of people have looked and said, man, y'all must just be rich there at Deep South Homestead. I mean, you do this, you do that. I mean, you go on and on and on. We get these emails all the time and comments in our things. And guys, it's not that we're rich. It's at some point in our life we lived on less so that now we can live on more. And we can enjoy our time more. We have more to spend. I mean, we don't have a house note. I don't have a truck payment. I mean, I don't have all these indebtednesses that lots of people have. I'm not tied up in a 30-year mortgage. You know, I did it in 7 years. And I have a nice home. It wasn't like I built a dinky little shack. I mean, I built a nice home and I paid a lot of money for it, and I busted my tail. I don't ever talk bad about anybody who owns anything, because if you worked for it, you deserve it. And that's my outlook on life. The problem with society today is that, and it's not the people's fault. It's not our kids' fault. It's not the people's fault. It's the powers to be's fault. And some of it is our fault, and that's because of the way we were raised, or we raised our children. The powers to be have fixed it so that a certain percentage of your income, it takes that to pay a house note, which is totally ludicrous to me. I do not agree with it. I stick with the rules that my father told me. And y'all have heard me say this before, that if any payment you have is more then what you make in a week's check, you're living outside your means. You'll never get ahead. You're living from hand to mouth. You're living in a dangerous situation. If something happens to you 1 week and you lose 1 week's paycheck, then you can't hardly make it up, because if it takes more than a week's paycheck to pay one of your notes, then you just cut into the other paychecks to pay a note. You've got to rob from Peter to pay Paul. You got to do these, you know, the old sayings. And guys, it's not a healthy place to be financially. And I have never, I can honestly say in my life, other than for the 7 years that I built this place here, and really I didn't do it then, because I could have stretched it out the full 30 years. I just doubled up on the land and the house, because they were in two separate notes, and my truck was in a separate note, and I just really dumped a lot of money into them. And that's what I advocate doing if it was me. It worked for me. Now, I understand that some people are in financial situations where they just cannot do it. I get that. I see it all the time. I was one of them kind of people. I went in debt for a house in my early 20s, and I had that house payment, and I had that house insurance and all, and the escrow, and all this stuff was all added into one. The taxes was all added into the house payment. Because at 20 years old, I thought that was a way to go. And had the home built. I didn't build it myself. I had it built. And I paid on this thing for 5 years. And one day I was sitting there looking, and I said, you know what? I looked around me. I owned a farm, had a nice barn, nice pond, and 100 and something pecan trees on the place, and it was nice, beautiful pasture land, had cattle, it was fenced. I mean, really nice place. And I sit there and looked at that, and I said, you know, for the next, because it was financed for 25 years, I said, for the next 25 years of my life, I'm going to be indebted to this. And it really struck home to me. I said, I'll be almost 50 years old before I pay for this house. I won't be able to do anything between now and 50 years old. And at that point, the house will be wearing down, and I'll have to do some upkeep to the house, so I still might not be able to do anything. I will have to put a roof on it and, you know, different things. And I said, I don't like where I am financially. Because my house payment wasn't more than I made a week. But it left me uncomfortable knowing that the next 25 years of my life, or the next 20 years, because I already paid on it for 5, the next 20 years of my life was going to be spent working my fingers to the bone to pay for this place. Because the banks were getting a ton of interest off of it. I didn't know any better when I had the house built. It was on a rule of 78's loan, where I paid all the interest up front and then I paid on the house. And I didn't know any better at that time. Well, I got to sitting down and looking at it, and I was like, you know what? I've made a bad mistake. And guys, I was on family property. I was on an inheritance. And I had to make a hard decision. I had to decide to sell an inheritance, which was the land that the house was on, in order to get out from under the house. And the sad part about it was, when I sold it, because of the kind of loan I had, the interest had to be paid, so I virtually got zero money for the land. But nevertheless, I made that decision to sell. And it took a couple of more years before it actually sold, but when it did sell, I had to rent, which was the first time in my life I had ever rented. I swore that I would never do that, because to me it was just like taking money and lighting a match to it and burning it. You know, I have nothing. They can tell me when to leave, they can tell me what to do, and I have nothing. I've just paid for a roof over my head. I have no future. And But I had to. And I understand there's times in life when you have to. I don't advocate people staying there. I stayed there for 6 months until finally it got the best of me. I was in a neighborhood. I'm not used to being around a bunch of people, and I couldn't sleep at night. I mean, the neighbors were making noise all night long, and I bought a piece of property out in the country where there was absolutely nobody, which is where I live at now. Back then there was nobody out here except me and one old man that lived down the road. And I bought the property. I had some money left over from when I sold the house, and I paid cash for the land. And at that point, I told my wife, I said, you know what? We got to build a house. And she said, oh, well, who are we going to get to do it? I said, no, you didn't understand what I said. I said, we have got to build a house. We've got to do it ourselves. Of course, she knew absolutely nothing about building houses. And at 20 years old, or 22 years old, or 25 at that point, I didn't know a lot about building houses, but I was willing to give it a shot. I bought all kind of books and manuals and stuff. And I began to study houses and framing and structures and electrical and plumbing. And I mean, night after night after night, I would read those books until I finally got it in my head. And we sit down and designed a home, very economical home, very easy to build, and I built that house. It took me 6 months to get it blacked in. And the day I had it blacked in and had it wired with electrical in it, I didn't have any air or any heat or nothing. I told her, I said, we're moving in. And she says, we don't have anything out there. We didn't even have a kitchen, nothing. I said, I don't care. We're moving in. We moved in February, and it was in the 20-degree range. I had no windows. I just had styrofoam over the windows. And guys, we made do on little. And over the next 5 years, I worked on this house and paid off everything that I could pay off. And it worked out to where in about 7 or 8 years, that house was paid for. And it literally was such a blessing for me to be able to have that. I was able to live on less for a while so that I could live on more later. But then a little later in my life, one of those tragedies happened. I ended up going through a divorce that y'all have heard me talk about in some of my other videos. And when I done that, I was back to square one. I just willfully gave the house to my spouse because my daughter, I needed a place for my daughter to live, and I didn't want her to be out not knowing where she was at, so I gave them the place. And guys, I had to go in debt again. And this is the place that I live at now. I went deep in debt because I was young still. I was very robust. I was very headstrong. And I said, it don't matter. I can pay for it. I was making good money. And guys, I sunk myself really deep in. And it took me 7 years to get out from under it. Because one day I sit and looked and I said, you know what? I've just put myself right back where I was. I didn't learn my lesson hardly. And I busted my tail living on less again, so that now that I'm at the age I'm at now, I can live on more. Because I don't have all the notes hanging over my head that has to be met every month. If I don't work, or if I don't bring in a paycheck or make any money, I'm still okay because my place is paid for. As long as I keep the taxes paid on it and I can keep the electricity turned on, we're good to go. We raise our own food. That's how we can do what we do. We take what money we have, we stick it back, and we save and we save and we save, and when we get enough money saved up to do a project, we do the project so that we can have more. Because at one point, we lived on less. And this is what I try to tell homesteaders today. People that are going out there trying to start their homesteads. Guys, you may be like me when I was young. You may not have any construction skills. You may not know anything. I mean, I had never built anything. I had helped my daddy own a house one time, you know, put up a wall or two when he was putting an addition on one of our houses, and my dad was not a carpenter by no means, and I had just helped him. I mean, I had helped my father-in-law do some work around his place, and I had learned a few things by just hands-on. But I'm self-taught. I got the books. I read. I studied. I put my mind to what I wanted to do, and I learned it. And I turned out to be a carpenter that built $1 million homes. Stayed in business for 26 years before I retired, building just massive structures, you know. So, guys, it's whatever you put your mind to. You can do it. If you're starting your homestead, I encourage you, unless you just have the money from where you sold a place and you can buy another place, the cheapest way to go is just to buy a piece of property and start out. And like I told my daughters, build a home or buy a home that's small, something that can be added to. As you grow and your family grows, you can add to it. Don't buy a structure that's so huge that you want everything mom and daddy had. After 25, 30 years of marriage, you want it the first year you get married. You're going to sink yourself deep in debt and you're going to be in trouble. You're never going to be able to see daylight. You're going to live from hand to mouth and you're going to struggle. If one of you gets sick, if one of you gets hurt, you're going to lose what you got. Because I can tell you about that. I've lost places before from going and getting hurt, not being able to pay your debts and having to sell what you have. I've been there. So guys, what today I want you to take away from Porch Time is learn to live on less in the beginning, so that somewhere, at some point down the road, you can live on more. You know, if I had the option to buy a lot of land in a small house versus a big house and a small piece of property, I would buy the big piece of land with the small house, because you can always add to the house, and then you have enough land to be sustainable. I mean, these are things that you have to think about. Don't go sticking your head out deep in debt for a big, huge home because you want all the amenities of life right up front. If you have to, buy a starter home. Keep it for, well, in the United States here, I mean, you can keep it for 2 years and live in it, and you can sell it. You don't have to pay a capital gains tax on it unless they change the law again on us. You know, you can do that. That's what lots of people around here do. They buy places, they stay on them for 2 or 3 years, they turn around and flip them. They don't have to pay a capital gains. They take the money they earned off of that, put it onto another place until after about 6 or 7 years, they're able to pay cash for a home. Guys, if you have to do that, maybe that's what you have to do. I don't know. But I know there's ways to get around being stuck deep in debt your whole life. So there's a lot to be said about living on less so that you can have more in the end. I mean, that is the goal. Take time. Think about this aspect. You may be like me. I had to make a hard decision about selling heir property to get out from under the debt of a 25-year mortgage. I didn't want to do it because it was a beautiful land and it was family property, but I did it. And I do not regret it one bit in the world. I am very satisfied with the decision that I made because it was best for me. Because if not, I would be only just a few years ago being out from under the debt of that home, and I would still be in that little house on that same little piece of property. Like it is, I've already been here where I'm at for 30 years almost, and I've got, I'm going to probably say 50% more, almost 100% more than I had then. So guys, it is definitely a goal worth attaining if you can learn to live on less for a while so that in the end you can have more. I hope that today Porch Time has been something that's been somewhat encouraging and maybe helpful to you, because it was definitely a lesson that I learned, and I try to teach anybody that I come in contact with today to live by this method, and you will not regret it. Thank you guys from Deep South Homestead.